Get started. So thank you all for being here tonight for finding a co-founder, the perspective from the technical side. So we're really excited to have you here for this event. My name's Cameron Law. I'm the executive director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And the event that came up tonight, or the one that we created, was this great collaboration between the Carlson Center and Hacker Lab. And through a conversation with Niall, we were just chatting about what are some of the challenges that we see in our entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I can tell you there's just time and time again that we get so many entrepreneurs that come saying, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder, and predominantly it's always looking for the technical side of that co-founding relationship. And so we really thought, let's have a dialogue and conversation and kind of debunk some of that myth in building that relationship. And so we're really excited to have some amazing panelists that can shed some light into, how to build that relationship and how to take some tangible steps forward, and ultimately kind of seeding a proper venture with both the technical and business components in line. And so thank you all for being here. Our kind of housekeeping is a recommendation is putting your Zoom feature in the speaker view so you can see who's actually speaking instead of a bunch of different faces and some different names. So if you put yourself in the speaker view, I think it'll be the best engagement for you in this process. We will be using the chat feature. So if you want to put your questions in the chat throughout the panel discussion, I will be able to filter that in to Niall and the panelists at the end of the panel. And then before we get started, I'm gonna just launch a quick poll just to kind of get a pulse of the room, and then we'll get started and I'll hand it over to Niall. So if you can take a couple seconds to fill out the poll in front of you. I think it's 3 questions long, just kind of reading the room and getting an understanding of who's here. So we got some coming in. We have people running a startup. We have some people that are curious about it. We got one person that's needing a co-founder, but they want to start. All right, we got about 70% of you. Give it about 10 more seconds and then we'll share the results. So Niall, you can be able to see everything. All right, I'm gonna end the poll now. And I'll share it with all of you. So it looks like, in the room we got over 50% of the people are currently running a startup, and 75% of you are looking for a co-founder. So it definitely validates our thought in, kind of hosting this event, and really excited to have hopefully some connections, whether that's through the chat or some key learnings taken away from the panel that will be key. And then, looking at what type of co-founders are you looking for, there's quite the mix. So we have some technical software, some technical specialty, and then about 20% is on the business area. So feel free again to use that chat function and say who you are, what your business is, and if you're looking for a particular type of co-founder, that would be the great way to start to connect. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Niall and we'll get started. So thank you all for being here.
Perfect. Thanks, Cameron. So yeah, Cameron and I and Eric over at Hacker Lab had this, nice little call, and we're discussing some of the things in the, some of the trends we've noticed in the startup event community. And one of the things that had always jumped out to me, being somebody with more a CS background, was the events where I've attended and had an almost onslaught of people who are more from the business point of view, where they have an idea and they say, hey, I need somebody to code it. I need somebody with a technical background, and how often that was happening. So that was kind of the birth of this event and the idea here, and really putting a focus on that kind of co-founder finding ritual with a real eye on the technical side of things. And so my name's Niall. I'm the CTO of Hacker Lab, thinker, coder, maker, by virtue of being involved in Hacker Lab in the area. I ended up sitting in on a lot of startup talks over the past few years, and so that's kind of my background with respect to that. The goals of this talk are to help those who are thinking about diving into the startup world understand some of the more technical concerns related to creating a business, especially those with a technical component, and to share some concerns and questions that someone from a more technical than business background might have. So the other kind of outside of folks who are from a business background and are looking for maybe a technical co-founder, it's also the idea is for folks who may have a technical background. They may have, they may be a software person, or they may have a super specific field knowledge in some industry, who've played with the idea of getting involved in a startup, but don't have that kind of business background, don't have a lot of that training and a lot of those connections in the industry that maybe some of the more business-minded folks do. So it's kind of dual purpose there. Yeah, and the basic structure is we have some wonderful panelists here, and I'll be introducing them in a moment. We have a list of topics and questions. We'll be going through that and asking questions of the panelists, and hopefully get some free-flowing discussion going on there. We encourage the sharing of anecdotes alongside answers and discussions between the panelists. And for everyone listening, we ask that you please put any questions in text into the chat, and we'll be keeping track of those. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session where we can go through some of those questions that are asked. You can ask those questions at any time, but we'll be answering them at the end there. So without further ado, we'll be introducing our panelists. First one on my list, Dan Cullen. Veteran in the semiconductor industry and an angel investor in the Sacramento area. He's a veteran leading mentor and investor in the Sacramento area. He was part of the leadership team that took Level 1 Communications, one of SAC's most successful startups, from pre-revenue through IPO and eventually acquisition by Intel. Since then, he's been an active mentor for entrepreneurs through the Sacramento Angels, UC Davis GSM, Hacker Lab, startup weekends, and individual one-on-one interactions. As an angel investor, Dan has been an early investor in local success such as Marine Bio Innovations, Digital Music Group, and Visicon, pardon me if I mispronounced that. Dan is also an active maker and hacker specializing in present-day and vintage electronics and radio projects, and I have personally seen him do wizardry with really, really old shortwave radio stuff, so all-around cool dude. Next up on the list, we have Lauren Kelly, founder of Mustard Square. She operates at the intersection of design and technology, bringing together creativity and technical excellence. She would describe herself as a true geek. Lauren has designed, built, and deployed web-based products for over 20 years. Since graduating from UC Davis, where she studied design and managerial economics, Lauren has worked on projects for Instagram, U2, Reagan Presidential Library, Mount Vernon Presidential Library, Shutterstock, Gensler, Wells Fargo, HP, Intel, McAfee, Maxim Integrated, Intersil, Kaiser Permanente, Sutter Health, Thomas Jefferson University Hospitals, UC Berkeley, UC Davis, and the University of Technology in Sydney, as well as Stanford University. In her free time, she created Wayfind It, a web-based application designed to streamline the process of auditing physical spaces and environments such as hospitals, healthcare campuses, retail stores, and universities, and has served as the San Francisco chapter chair of SEGD, and has served as the board of AIGA for the Junior League of Sacramento, and as a co-director of Design Week Sacramento. Very impressive resume there. Thanks for joining us. Next up, Matt Pristone, who's the co-founder of Riskalyze. He's a UC Berkeley graduate, or physics graduate. Before co-founding Riskalyze in 2011, he worked on nuclear detection research for the federal government at Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and he now oversees Riskalyze's engineering, core technology, and data center operations. When he's not empowering the world to invest fearlessly, you can usually find Matt biking, running, hiking, or brushing up on his double precision floating point arithmetic. Floating point adders are fun, the bane of my existence, and I didn't even have to build them. Pei-Chen Chang, co-founder of TCheck. One of Pei-Chen's favorite quotes is, "If you can just avoid dying, you get rich." Born in Taiwan, raised on a U.S. Air Force base in Okinawa, Japan, Pei-Chen channeled his propensity for endurance sports to help create TCheck, the world's leading home tester for cannabis plant and infusions. After undergrad studies at Rensselaer, I actually must admit I don't know how to pronounce that university's name, Polytechnic Institute, RPI, in upstate New York. He earned his MBA from Oregon State University. His first job out of college was at HP, where he discovered that he was a below average engineer, but an above average product manager. It was also at HP where he met friends who could eventually become co-founders and co-workers at TCheck. Building a technology startup is difficult in the best of times. Building and growing a technology startup in the cannabis space through a global pandemic is especially taxing. So TCheck now employs 16 people in their Roseville office. And last but definitely not least, John O'Grady, entrepreneur and technologist. He's an entrepreneur, technologist, business development and operations executive with exceptional drive and leadership in the formation of and execution of new businesses, products, and strategic relationships. Specialties include defining and building new products and companies from the ground up, forging strategic alliances and creating partner ecosystems, go-to-market planning, market opportunity identification and positioning, strategy and corporate development, experience in building and leading remote and offshore teams. So that's the overview of our panelists, and so glad that everyone was able to join us, and I thank you all for giving us the time to go over this panel. So we've kind of divided this talk up into a few topics or categories. The one we'll be starting with is idea versus person. The idea there is discussing the balance and interplay between a startup idea and the people who will be implementing it. The next topic is division of labor and the logistics of onboarding. So deciding what role a new person plays within an organization and how to determine what roles are necessary within a potential new organization. Next one is failure and its warning signs. It's about managing expectations and how to spot trouble from afar, if possible. And then research in the idea, how to do due diligence and how to vet an idea or business proposal. Lastly, finding a co-founder, where to look, what traits to look for, and how to approach someone. And then, as I said, at the end of that, we'll have a Q&A session where any questions that were asked during the chat we can respond to. Yeah, thank you for that. So to jump right in, idea versus person. So the first question in the topic I have is, what traits, skills, or behaviors are desirable in a technical co-founder? And that can be just anecdotally, or what are some red and green flags that stand out? And Lauren, I guess we can start with you.
Sure. I think in terms of, I think you need to have a good idea of the technology that you're going for. And so making sure that you're not trying to fit a square technologist into a round hole. So if you know that you are going to, like Chad was mentioning, if you're going to do stuff with Matterport, and if you're doing things with photography, make sure that you are, not trying to bring somebody on board and have them learn at the same time. You really want to make sure that that they specialize in what you're doing, and that requires doing your homework to make sure that you know what either languages or what pieces you're going to want the technologist to work with.
Perfect. Anybody else have anything to add? Maybe John?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking for a person that's always learning. I mean, our business is always changing, and so you need someone who's learning and continuing learning. I think you want to make sure that you're engaging someone that can be to somewhat a teacher as well, because if you're a non-technical person or you're eventually hiring more junior people, this is a person that's going to need to mentor and lead them as well. Yeah, so I think those are some of the things, and I think you want to kind of there's a stereotype of, I think, of some people that just will take on a task, go in a hole, and then emerge with everything done. It sounds great, but it actually, I think, in an early stage, especially for a co-founder, is not a good characteristic to have in your co-founder.
I'm going to vehemently agree with John. Learning is everything. Here at TCheck, we actually are using technologies today that weren't invented yet when we started the company 5 years ago. So you definitely have to learn new stuff all the time. The other thing I want to say about co-founders is that if you ever okay, this is gonna be a little weird, but when you talk to your spouse or your future spouse and they say, hey, I want to have the perfect wedding, okay? If you find a co-founder that says, I want to build the perfect software, run like hell, okay? Get out of there, because you gotta ship, right? The most important thing for a business, basically, is to get the product into the paying customer's hands. And if you spend too much time developing, you've waited too long. I think there was another, quote, by the way, let's see, if you're not ashamed of your product when you first ship it, you've waited too long. So I encourage people to ship as soon as possible.
That's so true. My first startup, the mother of the CEO made a sign for us that just said, "Just ship the pig," and so we had that up in our office.
Patient, I really like the way you were describing that. When Cameron and I were brainstorming this, this part of the topic or this talk, the kind of working title was the co-founder meeting ritual, and kind of playing on the fact that a lot of the initial interactions with a potential co-founder have some of the same qualities as trying to find somebody in a more personal sphere, and that you're getting to know somebody who you're going to be spending theoretically a lot of time with down the road. You're going to have to get along. You need to know when you can agree, know how to disagree well, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I really like the way you brought that up.
I can add a few things now if you want.
Yeah. Go for it.
Like Lauren indicated that if you're a business person, you want to make sure that you have some idea of what technologies are needed, and the technology person needs to have those skills. But I think likewise, especially if you're a company that's very technology based, you need a co-founder on the technology side that's not afraid of the business side, that can really give you input on the growth of the market and as far as the technology and what's going to be needed in the future, and really understand what the customer needs are so they can help in that perspective. So for a co-founder, I think you need somebody that doesn't just want to code or just make something. They got to be able to be part of the business team. And it's really a team. When you're in a startup, the roles are probably pretty blurry, and they need to be able to help each other and really have expertise in both areas. If you just need somebody to code, then you just hire a coder.
Yeah, and just really quickly, I didn't mean to indicate that it should be a given, and most people who are technologists are always learning and always learning new things. So I didn't mean, maybe a better way to phrase it is that, and I think Carolyn put it in the chat too. If you are interested in doing something with, mapping, make sure that you are working with somebody who is interested in mapping and is interested in learning the trajectory. Like, to Pei-Ching's point, it might not exist yet. The technologies that we'll be using will be, and especially if we're thinking about hardware, somebody in the chat earlier was mentioning it. Jasmine was mentioning about blockchain. Everything is evolving, but make sure that they are interested in learning the route that you're going.
And that was, yeah, I'm glad you referenced that, because I saw a couple things in the chat too that spoke to that, where people were saying, hey, well, I don't even know what technology I want to be working with. Like, how do I know what I don't know already? And I think some of the, onus is on, well, you're trying to find somebody to kind of help you figure that out. And so somebody who's flexible and can at least give you some feedback there would be super useful. And kind of the second part of that question that I had was any, like, I don't want to say, boil it down to a checklist, but any really red or really green flags that you think would stick out for somebody who might be on the more technical side? Like, I know Dan mentioned somebody who just codes and just wants to sit in the basement all day and type code away, but any other things?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the big things to watch out for is, somebody who is, we use the term a lot, kind of, religious about a certain technology, a certain approach to solving a problem. I think one of the quotes that's always on my mind, that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And I think that, to me, the maybe number one kind of skill to look for is that flexibility, because there's a good chance that things are going to change early on. And I'd say that goes for technology, goes for, the way you approach, how fixated on a certain go to market strategy or business model. So I'd kind of I guess the inverse of that, being particularly set on, I've got this perfect wedding in mind and I want that to be my future, I think is really going to narrow your ability to adapt and adjust.
I'd also say when you just really with anyone, but you know, a lot of times trust your gut too when you are meeting someone. Sometimes you'll get a feeling about a person one way or the other, good or bad, and more times than not, that feeling is right, but people tend to ignore it. So I mean, there are a lot of subtle cues that people give off that may not be obvious or fit on a checklist, but you unconsciously process it. So definitely trust your gut when you're thinking about that.
Well, you know, along those lines, I know this one's going to be a little bit off topic, but and I don't, maybe the list of people who have had to find a co-founder during a pandemic is much shorter than those who've relied on traditional networking means. But do you think meeting people over Zoom and in more email, non-face-to-face ways does a disservice to the process? Do you think there are any strategies that could be adapted to help in this kind of a situation?
Sounds like a good business opportunity. Yes, I think it does. Personally, I think it does a disservice. I mean, not everybody is camera ready. And sometimes you find that more prevalent even among technical folks as well. But it makes it harder, but not impossible.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah.
I think it's a real
Go ahead,
opportunity
Dan.
because in a startup, stuff happens and you just don't know what that stuff's going to be. So there's some adversity here, and just see how that person handles it as far as only being able to meet you through Zoom or maybe at some really far socially distanced interaction. So it's a real good test of what's going to happen when there's some issues that confront them.
Perfect. So we'll kind of move on to the next question underneath that. This one has to do with the idea of an idea. One thing that I've noticed in some of the aforementioned situations where I'll find myself a coder sitting in the back of a startup event where people are looking for an app developer or something, is the feeling, whether true or not, that ideas in and of themselves can be overvalued in the equation there. And I'm taking the sign of everyone smirking as a good thing, that I'm resonating somewhere. So have you encountered scenarios of overvalued ideas? Thoughts on the weight or the importance of the idea alone being the basis for the startup? What are things you definitely want to ask as a follow-up to that?
I'm laughing my ass off because I was that guy, right? You know, I created this thing, and you know, I thought it was the coolest thing since sliced bread, and I didn't want anybody to steal it, so we spent a whole lot of time and effort building it, and we found out there were no customers for this. And so, you know, that old saying, right? Ideas are worthless. It's all about the execution. It is so true. The very first thing when you have an idea is to go and sell the thing. Before you make it, just put together a PowerPoint or whatever and sell it first. And, you know, the worst thing you can do is build a product and you have no customers. And you just waste a lot of time and energy.
Yep, no, I definitely agree. I think people, it's probably one of the, if there is a contentious time between the business founder and the technical co-founder when they're trying to talk about equity and all that stuff, it's usually the business founder or the person with the idea definitely overvalues the concept of that idea. And it is about execution. Now, that said, there are ideas that are unique and novel, but you know, a lot of them aren't, and a lot of them are really about how you're going to execute, how you're going to align this to a customer. You know, there's ideas out there that are been done many times, but the business model is what's novel or unique and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it is one of the areas that is overvalued, but you don't want to discount it too much either, because that person with the idea, passion, and vision is really, you know, selling and conveying what they have. And so hopefully that's compelling and it sounds good. And of course, if they, you know, believe what they're saying, they're going to think it's the most valuable thing in the world. So I think it's a natural contentious point.
Yeah, my experience, especially with technical entrepreneurs is they fall in love with the technology. Business people fall in love with the product, but it's all about the business. And I have a technology background, and I can fall in love with technology, but I always tell myself it's all about the business, and just keep thinking that.
Yep. No, very true. And then, you know, most original ideas in a lot of successful companies aren't what they make their success on. I mean, I was involved at Adobe a while ago, and Adobe, when they started, was nothing the company we think of Adobe today. They actually did high-end printing presses. It was a terrible market. There was no business there. And so there was like 5 customers. And so they pivoted and was able to build a very strong business. So, you know, a lot of times that original idea gets you started, but by the time you're getting customers, it's a distant memory.
Brilliant, thanks. So moving on to the next topic. So this question is, it's going to be expanded on a little bit later, but we'll start with the basic part of it. Assuming you've found somebody who's more on the technical side of things, deciding whether that person is a CTO or a founder, or something else. What are the differences between a CTO and a founder, and how often does role changing occur, and how do you help ensure that ensure potential founders, technical or otherwise, are aware and prepared for that?
Well, as a CTO and founder, I would say you can be both. My experience through Riskalyze was really, you know, the first few years we were such a small team that, you know, we didn't put a lot of emphasis on, you know, on what the titles and so on were. But as far as role changing, I can say from my experience that, you know, every 2 to 3 years over the last 9, I guess, has really looked very different. You know, individual contributor, writing code all day, architecting some of the systems, shifting to much more kind of line manager as we're trying to grow a team and onboard new folks and you know, fill in some of the gaps as we don't have particular skills hired or roles designated, and then kind of to where I am today, that's a bit more strategic and architectural. But that I think, kind of back to the earlier point, I think that flexibility to be able to change roles is either critical, or have a plan to say, when this need arises, we're going to go find the right person to bring in to fill in that gap, but not find yourself unwilling to adapt to that change when it's needed.
And I think a rephrasing to anybody else who might want to jump in, or feel free to answer the question as is, would be, in your experience with the startups, have you changed roles? Like, is that the normal? And kind of maybe share a little bit about what happened with you.
I've been involved.
Okay.
Hey, John.
I've been involved.
John, I choose you.
Okay. I've been involved in a couple startups where I've been not a founder or co-founder of the company. I've come in as CTO, where the technical founder ended up working for me. So that person had to make a shift. You know, I've been involved in scenarios where, you know, part of my job really was to work myself out of a job and take on another task. So I've gone from, you know, almost building every team in the organization. So I think it is common. I think I'd be more concerned about bringing someone on, well, it depends. The CTO, founder or co-founder is somewhat a meaningless title. It's cachet because you're the co-founder, but it really doesn't tell you what you do or how you do it. You can be an admin and be the co-founder. That's actually happened. So you know, I think that's really about being there early and contributing to the business in a meaningful way. What your role is in that company, what that is really going to be where your title has. And I think sometimes people tend to try to find a technical founder. And of course, the technical co-founder wants to be a CTO, but that person may or may not be ready for that position. They may be an awesome coder, but as a company grows, CTOs do less coding and stuff like that. And so they may not be able to grow that business, be involved in the strategic end of what a CTO is involved. So I personally, kind of like Matt, I'm not a big fan of a lot of titles in early stage companies when it comes to that. I think your things are going to evolve, and I think the opportunity is there for anybody to seize that opportunity, because you're always going to be growing if you're successful. But it's also a hard conversation when you have to go to someone and say, you're no longer CTO, you're now just a developer, and so that can be an uncomfortable conversation for some as well.
Yeah, John, I think you hit some really good points there. And, I always tell people it's a lot easier to invite people or put people in a job than it is to tell them you need to change or you need to leave. So that's something really important to look at. But from personal experience, a few things on the startup. I was in, one of our founders was the technical person, and he was a brilliant design engineer, and he decided to be a design engineer probably for the first 5 or 6, maybe 7 years of the company, and knew that there was going to be other people brought in, probably with a little more strategic outlook, even though he had a very good strategic outlook. He eventually became CTO. So he understood that his role is going to be, his most valuable place as a role was to be actually in there designing the product and leading the teams to design the product. And for myself, when I began, it was me, myself, and I, basically. And through the company's growth, eventually I got to the point where I really had no idea how many people were working for me. But there was other members of the executive team that just couldn't change as the company grew. And we just had to find other people that come in with that. So I think that's really something that when you're trying to find a founder, a co-founder, or somebody that's going to lead, be in the executive role and lead the company, do they have experience in building groups before, and have they been able to demonstrate that they can do things on their own, and as well as be able to lead people and really incentivize people to work and go towards a common goal.
Now, earlier you asked a question, what are some of the red flags? If somebody's too hung up on a title, that's a big red flag. Because that kind of indicates that person has a lane and they want to stay in that lane. And when you start a company, you're like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 guys, and everybody has to be super flexible and whatever needs to be done, and you just got to be willing to pick it up and do it, even though that's not your formal title, if you will. So at TCheck, I started out as theoretically the sales and marketing guy, and then quickly evolved into the engineer guy, then evolved back to sales and marketing, and then eventually CEO, right? So roles change all the time. And this is within the span of what, 3 years? Yeah.
I agree with that. I think to Dan's earlier point, if you're starting out and there's just a handful of guys and girls who are starting the company, everyone needs to be all hands on deck, and you're all working together and, doing different hats and things like that. It's been interesting because over the last few years, depending on the phase of the company, like I'm getting to the point now with my company where I need to bring a CTO in. There are some concepts that I am not familiar with, and I need advice. And so it feels like I'm bringing somebody more senior in that can help guide me past the part and continue learning. But I was approached, and I know we'll talk about it a little bit later this evening, but I was approached to join another startup and to function as the CTO. So I'm not actually coding for that company, but the stage that they're at, my knowledge with how we can set them up to get to their MVP is enough. So it's sometimes working, in both hats, and it's been fun to kind of see how, through my experience, how your roles change, and even at the same time, right? So.
was there anything in particular, just to follow up on with Lauren, that kind of, without obviously getting too specific if there's sensitive information regarding a company, but like that triggered your need for, hey, now we really kind of need a CTO as a standalone position?
Yeah, so my background, I'm a full stack web developer, and so I'm getting to the point now where there are just some like scaling things. Like I'm not a DevOps person, but I was able to learn through, doing Amazon Web Services and doing some of those trainings to be able to like figure it out up to a certain point. But it's, it's at the point now where, we're revenue positive, and, we have a few hundred people in the system, and so it's going well. But to get to the next level, it's really making sure that that I haven't missed something. There might be some, security best practices that I'm not sure about, and it's just bringing somebody in to make sure we're all buttoned up before we continue and grow.
Cool. Thanks so much. And so it seems like everyone's settled on that one. So moving on to the next topic. So assuming you've kind of found a person who wants to be involved in the company, how do you determine the level of involvement somebody is willing to commit? I know Lauren had said previously that she was approached by another company to kind of be a CTO for that company. And that kind of seems like, an odd thing. It's like, hey, I was having trouble managing this company, and now I'm taking on, that role at a whole nother place. What, how do you have that conversation with somebody about like, hey, are you willing to put in, 20% of your time? Is this a part-time gig for you? Is this something you're just working on the side? Is this something you're, you have the ability, right? It's the funds and the time to be able to commit fully into something. And what are some of the questions you might want to ask early on to help figure this out, or just things on that topic?
Sure. I think for this, particular thing, and when we talk a little bit later about how you approach somebody, for this particular company, it already, the CEO of that company approached me partially because a lot of the research and a lot of the work that I was interested in and had already sort of produced lent itself well to what they needed for their MVP. And so in that sense, it really made sense to, and was relatively easy since I had just gone through the process. So again, it's not necessarily, and knowing the phase that your company is in, if they had approached and said like, hey, we're ready to scale and do all this stuff, then you have to be clear what you're willing to commit, and also frankly being clear about what your skill set is. I'm very good at getting products to MVP, and I'm at the point now where I need help scaling. But aside from that, and going again to the red flag thing, the idea of like, oh, I want you to come in as a technical co-founder, and I just want to give you the ideas and have you execute it. That is a huge red flag for me as a technical person. I'm like, get out of here. I have my own ideas. I'm not going to, just make yours. Mm-hmm. So some of them is making sure that you're being very clear, to your point, Niall, about how much time you have to commit. If it's, again, going, like I said, the first question, sort of in the same sphere of what you're already studying and what you're already researching. And then also just being very clear about your agreements and saying, here's what I'm willing to commit, and here's how I can help you.
Awesome, thanks. Anybody else on this topic? John?
Well, I think there's sometimes a practical concern here as well, which is if you're an early stage, you have an idea and seeking a co-founder, you probably have no money. And so asking someone to quit their job and work and build out something full-time for no money is sometimes a very hard value proposition. So I think realistically, you may be looking at, okay, what do I need to accomplish to move my project along or my company along? And can I find someone that may have a day job, but is willing to put in the hours at night? So they're willing to essentially moonlight or have a second job to make this happen, and that's pretty common for certainly very, very early stage companies. Back years ago, there were a number of people that had one hand in a startup and the other day job was at HP or Intel or something like that, and so they could pay the bills, but they could foster this idea along. The good side about that is you can move the project forward. The bad side is usually time, it takes longer.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on that, and probably from a different viewpoint, from an investor viewpoint. So as that bad person, the investor. And I think what you're saying as far as maybe somebody at night is fine in an early startup. But if you're going to go out and try to raise money beyond their friends and family, you need to have everybody that's going to be listed as an employee needs to be 100% in. And that's because if you expect us to be writing a check or maybe part of your board or help you out, in return, we expect everybody to be 100% in, and it just doesn't work that way. So make sure
totally
that
agree.
you can move forward on that.
Fantastic. Thanks. So with that, we're kind of ending that first segment and moving on to the second, which is titled Division of Labor and the Logistics of Onboarding. So this is, there's a lot of overlap between the topics. They're not strictly defined as categories. But first question we have here is, what questions or discussions should be had early on in a company to help solidify the division of labor in a startup? And does the division of labor need to be very black and white, and what level of ambiguity seems acceptable? I know pretty much everyone has spoken to the topic of people really do need to be flexible in the early stage, because roles and titles and all of those things change. That said, there is some level, I'm assuming there is some level of responsibility that needs to be shouldered by one person or the other. So how do you have those conversations? Do you do them strictly by background? Any advice you can have for doing that? And maybe not even purely as the technical side, but also from an interpersonal side. Like, some of this is going to be dealing with egos and people's feelings and all that kind of stuff. So it's a weird way of saying it, but yeah. Comments on that? Matt, I saw you smiling a little bit, so I'm assuming you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. I think I have a hard time saying there's a right answer to that. I would maybe say the universal thing is just tight communication, and beyond that, I've got personally my experience was very much we probably were early days. We were probably all wearing 6 to 8 hats in a in a given month, and we don't have a support team, so we're all picking up the phone sometimes, or doing sales, or go buy drinks or pay the bills, that kind of thing. I think having that expectation, I think it's really easy when you're that tight group. You might be seeing your founders, your co-founders more often than your spouse, and having that rapport to know that you trust each other, that you are not to say everybody is picking up necessarily at all times the same amount of work, but just having that clear and open communication. And that's my experience, that's one of the most important ways to know what is the next thing we need to add to the team. If it's a new skill, if we need to go carve out some time. I don't know. Besides that, I think I think different things work for different teams, and have a hard time seeing that as a formula that fits everybody.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to pin down that. The relationship's got to be at the point where you can just say this needs to be done, and somebody will say, okay, I'll just get it done. And I know the first hour I was at my startup, it was basically, okay, this is what needs to get done, and just go do it. And everybody's got so much to do, they're not going to be looking at how you do it. It's just expected that you get it done. So when you bring somebody on, you just need to somehow assure yourself that that's the type of relationship you're going to have. And it's hard to define, and part of it's probably some gut feeling or just really good research on how that person's been able to interact with with people they've worked with in the past.
Is there anything that can help with that kind of bonding experience early on to help people get to know each other? I mean, yeah, there's the standard, we're going to have a company retreat. Like, how do you do that at a startup that has no money, right? But any really good ways? Yeah, happy hour, like Laura said in the comments. Do you think there's a big importance in that? You know, if it's a group of friends that's starting a startup, that's obviously one thing. But if we're meeting people at networking events, we might not have the luxury of that kind of background. Any interesting stories with how you met a co-founder and how that turned into something? Nobody wants to share. That's okay. That one was out of spec. So, all right, moving on from that one, kind of related to that, division of labor can be a difficult thing. How do you determine when you actually need a co-founder versus a contract worker or coder who can work with essentially no equity and for pay? Like, assuming you have enough funds to pay somebody as a contract worker for a coder, what kind of level of work do you feel comfortable with going that route versus hiring on or bringing somebody into the company for equity as a legit co-founder?
I can't even imagine trying to start a company by myself.
Mhm.
The amount of work that it takes is unbelievable. And so, gosh, I would say right out of the gate, you need a co-founder. There's just too much stuff to do.
Well, what if it was past just two people? Like, assuming you had two folks as the co-founder and you would typically want to bring on a third co-founder or maybe a fourth. How do you decide when the technology is such that it might be better to just bring on somebody as a coder?
I think that if you have such a strong, very strong opinions of how the thing should work and how it should be built, a lot of times too, and I'm sure you guys have experienced, like, part of the joy of joining startups and doing this is getting to work together and create things together and have input and get, feedback on building something together. And so I would say that if you are the type of person who you have sketched out how everything should look, how it should work, and you have capital to pay somebody, if you're not really looking for a lot of input on how the thing should be built, then I would hire that out. Conversely, if you're looking for, more of a collaborative thing, and to Pei-Chen's point, part of building a business and everything is the fun of it being collaborative, but it depends on what your skill sets are of your co-founders. So, yeah, I guess that's what I'd say.
Cool.
Yeah. I think you have to, and I think someone said this earlier, you got to understand what type of company you're building. Are you building something that's deep rooted in technology, or are you building something that technology is a tool? Can the technology be manufactured, if you will? And there you can start looking at outsources. Now, that said, I don't encourage anybody to go solo. I mean, you may not hire a developer, but you may want to hire like a technical program manager or bring on that as a co-founder, because most people who go the outsource route do it at least 3 times, if not more, before they get what they want, because they cannot really, they'll get back the first project and they'll look at it and say, this is not what I asked for. And it is exactly what they asked for. They didn't ask right. And then there's a lot of details that need to get filled out that they're essentially ceding control over to the outsource or the contractor to do. And so you really need somebody that, if not going to do the coding, at least do that. It's a different skill set, but I highly recommend that, if you're going to go with the outsource model, if you can manufacture your software, it's capital efficient, it makes sense. You can get, for the same price of hiring one developer, you can hire a team offshore, but you can't just pray that it's going to get done. And if you're a non-technical founder, the odds of you being able to describe and manage what needs to get built successfully on the first time is highly unlikely. Not impossible.
I think John nailed it. You could imagine a founding team that doesn't have maybe a full-time engineer. I could imagine a really strong product manager kind of skill set, being able to leverage an offshore team. You're going to iterate so many times early on, and just having the communication gap, that maybe a time zone gap, maybe just the not having that close and tight relationship, or being as bought in the amount of time you need to put in. So I have a hard time seeing that as a really viable, or at least give yourself good odds of success. Maybe it works for some, but not one that I've come across much.
So in that vein, if there's, maybe you don't need somebody as a pure contract worker, but you want somebody involved in the company to help with maybe some of the high level decisions, could you be looking for, how do you, identifying whether you're looking for somebody who's going to be more of a CTO or a developer or a technical advisor, maybe. I know John brought that up when we were having a pre-discussion. I think it was John. Sorry if I got the wrong person, but sometimes what you need, maybe the technology component of your idea isn't that much ingrained in it. These days it probably is, but situations where you might want to look for a technical advisor, what does a technical advisor typically do that is different from CTO or developer on staff?
Well, so I've done a bunch of technical advising. I would say it's a hobby for me as a technologist. I enjoy doing it because it's how I keep current and continue to learn. So it's something that I just enjoy doing. But, so there are opportunities where people, they have basic questions, how do you structure, talk about the requirements, how you need to actually talk about the product to get it to develop. So I think there is a role, especially if you don't have a lot of money, for an advisor that's willing to spend, 10 hours a week, working with a company, and you can usually do something around equity or something like that to, so you're not paying out any money there, or it could be, there's, I do a lot of it just, as I said, because I enjoy learning. But, the key thing is you're going to go there, you want to make sure there's a commitment and again, that they're going to be accountable for the results that you think they're accountable for. So like any other arrangement that you would have, whether you're bringing someone on full time or as an advisor, having clear communications of what expectations are, what the person is accountable for, and the amount of time is key.
Fantastic, thanks.
I think one of the skills that that we overlook for a technical co-founder is their ability to sell. As much as we think the technical co-founder is the guy who, architects a solution or pounds a code or, does the electrical design or whatever, I think it's really important for all of the co-founders to engage with the customer. Because you might have this vision of what it is that the customer really wants, but you don't know until you stick it in front of somebody and said, well, here's this thing, give me $5 or give me $10 or something like that, right? And that's sort of when the rubber meets the road. And it may be a customer, it may be an investor, it may be potential employees, right? At every level, you have to sell the company. And so I think that's sort of an important characteristic for a co-founder.
Yeah, patient. I think you're right on with that. I think anybody that's involved in a startup's got to be able to sell it. But really important is they need to be able to listen. A lot of technical folks just love their technology and products so much that they're just trying to sell it rather than really listening to the market and to the customer on what their real needs are or what their real problem is and the problem that really needs to be solved. So that I think that's something that's really important. And I think when the founders, the startup I was with, he was really, really good at this. He was very open to input from customers and working with other engineers on spec committees and IEEE. And he was wide open. So like any company, we had to pivot before that word was popular to say. And the direction was the right direction. A lot of it was because of his input and his knowledge of what the customers needed.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I keep hearing that brought back up, and the ability to take in outside opinions being a very big green flag, and the converse of that being a huge red flag. Not being able to both work well and take, I want to venture as far as saying criticism, but also just different ideas, and avoiding kind of technology fixation and tunnel vision in that respect, and not having a favorite platform that you're going to run with till the end of time.
I think you're just related to that, because I definitely agree. But I think a lot of times there's too quick of a rush to build technology. That you should try to define as much of the business, the customers, things to do before you really start getting deep into the coding. And I think too many people go right to the coding thinking that's going to be the fastest path, and that's actually the longer path.
So spend the time developing the business idea first and foremost, and
Talking to customers, getting feedback. I mean, the tools out there right now to design and prototype things are amazing. So you can bring really well thought through ideas to a customer and get their opinion and vision before you actually have to hire, a non-technical person can do most of this stuff now, before you even have to bring in and start coding. So yeah, I think people think that it's all about the technology, and it's not. It's about the business, and you've really got to nail that.
I think I'd sort of disagree with that if you're building something and building a tool that you're using. So a lot of the work that I was doing with mapping was something that I was actually going out and doing site surveys. And so it has turned into a business, but it was something that I built out of necessity. And so for those two in the chat that were asking sort of how they figure out what technology they want to use or what is right. And to your point, John, the technology isn't the be all end all, and you can get to the same type of tool in multiple languages and in different ways. But one of the things that I think is equally important when you're figuring out what your audience is if you are, and coming from a technical person who does not have a sales and marketing background, part of the way that it was easy for me to speak about it and to talk about it is because I was so excited because it was actually helping me do work. And so I think too, if you're passionate about whatever it is that you're building, starting with the technology is fine, but John's absolutely right. It sure does take longer.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think a commonality between the both of you is that, John spoke to making sure your MVP and your MVS or MVP or MVS are solid. And Lauren, you spoke to, hey, this is a technology that I'm using, in my day-to-day life. This is something that's useful to me. I think both of those might be, different sides of the same coin, in that you've got some validation there in that this thing that I'm creating based on technology is something that so far, if it's useful to you, at least there's one person, but at least you can use that as a basis for finding others maybe in your field or other colleagues that might have that same need. And so maybe it can go multiple ways, right? There is no singular answer for that.
Yeah, well, it's true. There's no recipe for success.
Sure.
Otherwise, we would have all have that. We'd be successful, and life would be boring. So, I mean, a lot of it.
Oh, did we just lose John?
He had a salient point to make.
Pardon me?
Oh, you're back.
You're back.
Oh, I was going to say there's best practices, there's wisdom, but really, especially as a founder, part of your job is to figure out, taking this data and figure out what works for you and your business and your situation. Because as I said, there's not one way to do it, and if there was, we'd all be doing it that way.
What do you mean there's not one way? John, I came to this talk to find out the one way. I'm supposed to walk away from this with a checklist that will lead to success. We can start a pyramid scheme. It will be amazing. Or sorry, direct marketing, excuse me. Direct sales, whatever it's called. So yeah, that is, thanks. I'm glad we got some, some different opinions on that, because and different points of view looking at that, because I think it, it is important to remember that if you're trying to do something new, there's going to be things that are very different than everything that was there before. And that's a really vague sentence, but I think there's some truth to that. One last question in this topic that I want to touch on. And this is kind of a redirect in some sense from the way that last question went, but the actual title of CTO with respects to a startup versus a sorry, I read a chat one. With respects to a startup versus a small business versus like a medium business versus a large business, what is your definition of a CTO? And I've read a million, but at a very early stage company that might be 2 or 3 people, how is that going to change at a small business, let's say, you know, under 25 employees, and then at a medium sized business that might be regional, and then at a large company? Any thoughts on that?
I'll go with that, I guess, initially. Just that as an investor, I see a lot of really early stage startups where everybody has a C title, and that's just not workable. And I think in the early days, there's a CEO, maybe a CFO, but basically there should be one person that probably has to make the ultimate decisions. But everybody else, your VP of engineering or VP of sales or something like that, and I don't think you really need the C titles until later in life.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the risk you take by setting any C title, you know, C level early on, you really it's rare, if not you know, impossible to really successfully drop someone's title and still have that person be successful or, you know, thrive in their role. I think it's very often that you might have somebody early in the company who is leading a certain function or a certain domain, and that person might be great as an individual contributor or great at a small company scale. And there's a point where, okay, now I need to manage a team. That might not be my strong suit, and we need to hire a CTO, a VP of engineering, whatever it is. And having that option, that flexibility, it's a lot easier to increase someone's title than to ever decrease it. And you know, that keeping that person around and happy is important for your company.
Gotcha. And I'm hearing that it seems like there's consensus that there's no lateral at the C level other than 2 other C levels, and so anything is seen as a demotion kind of at that point.
Yeah, I think you know, as the company grows, the strategic planning is going to go from sitting around a table in the break room to something a little more formal. Then you have to maybe bring in a facilitator and bring more people in. And pretty soon you're going to find that you have a gap where you don't have somebody that can really provide and articulate the strategic strategy for technology or maybe for the sales or whatever. And that's when you know that you need somebody that can come in and really take that role and run with it. So try and put somebody in there before the need. It probably wastes valuable time and talent that could be used somewhere else. But just my opinion.
Cool, thanks. So next section, aptly named Failure and Its Warning Signs. So I think in recent startup culture, there's you know, the mantra fail fast, learn that what you're doing is not working sooner rather than later. And with failure comes deadlines and managing time and managing expectations. So to start this section, what are some strategies for managing deadlines, especially in an early stage startup? One where, you know, we may still be putting together our actual demonstratable MVP. How do you manage deadlines when you don't even have outside funding yet?
Well, I can tell you what I've done and worked for me is a lot of times your deadline is something that's fixed. I need to do this by this date. Now, what's variable, so the date's not going to change or the deadline's not going to change. So what changes is what do you do? So I think that's really what that conversation is about, is we have to hit something by this date. So what exactly can I do in that time, and coming to agreement there. And I also think you just have to make sure, I think one of the first people I worked for liked to have like weekly big milestones. I'm like, that you can't get enough done in a week. So you got to make sure your deadlines are real, or at least driving to something. You can have minor milestones, but the deadline should be something that's real. And as I said, the conversation is what can you do in that deadline? And the other thing I'll say is never put a deadline right before a holiday. And that's experience. So,
I agree with that, and also echoing something that Chang said earlier tonight about if you're not sort of scared when you're shipping it, adding deadlines in, and for anybody who is a technical co-founder or coding, there's nothing like a deadline to get your adrenaline up and get you coding, and faster than anything. So I think not being afraid to, but to John's point too, making sure that they're hopefully realistic, but giving yourself some pressure and making sure that there are some client or public facing, deadlines that you can be held accountable to make sure that things are moving forward.
Yeah, I think people work better generally with the right amount of pressure. You don't want too little, of course you don't want too much. So it's that finding what that right amount of pressure is that they won't crack, but I think you get the best results.
So are kind of arbitrary deadlines a good idea? And I don't want to say arbitrary in the sense of, I just made up a date, but say, I don't have right now a customer that I'm trying to ship to directly, right? We're trying to put together some example for whatever, it's still a passion project of ours. Is giving yourself deadlines, even when they don't necessarily need to be there, a good idea to apply the correct amount of pressure maybe?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything arbitrary about running a startup. So if you're doing arbitrary stuff, you're probably going to fail, and that would be a red flag to me. So I think whatever you're doing is going to be thoughtful, and you can, even if you don't have a customer, there should be a milestone for getting that customer, or something along those lines. So I don't believe in arbitrary.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, John, I couldn't agree with you more there. One of the things in our organization that I hate doing is setting arbitrary deadlines that or artificial deadlines, if you will, just to motivate or push the engineers or the salespeople or whatever, right? And I just find that it just backfires on you. They're like, okay, well, why this date? Right? If you can't answer that question, don't set the date. The only real deadline, I guess, if you will, there's only a few real ones, right? And they're generally external, right? Number one is, when do you run out of money? Okay, that's about as important one as you can get as far as an early stage startup goes. The next one is, when is that demo going to happen in front of either the customer or the investor or whomever? That meeting is set. You got to make it happen. I'm not sure there are too many more beyond that.
Well, the other deadline is, when is your competition coming into the customer for their deadline?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. So with that said, to move on in the failure theme, warning signs or red flags or green flags, I guess, would be things to avoid, that an arrangement is not working out. You hired somebody, you did your best, or you found a co-founder, you did your best to try to make sure this is somebody you can get along with. But what are some signs that you might have judged poorly, or it's not going to work?
Constantly missing deadlines.
Constantly missing deadlines.
Yeah, I think you commit to a deadline, you make the deadline. That is just what you're looking for, and I think you have to avoid. I've seen this with a few people in my past. You avoid people that sandbag as well. Sometimes technical folks will sandbag non-technical folks, and that you just can't have that.
Can you elaborate on sandbagging a little bit?
You describe me any problem, and I can make it sound like the most complicated thing in the world. That's going to take me 6 months, 5 people. If you were a Star Trek fan, who is it? Scotty on Star Trek.
Oh, yes.
Everything was impossible, but he got, and stuff like that. That was sandbagging.
Salespeople sandbag like crazy too, guys. Oh no, that quote is too high. We got to lower it.
Yes, that is true.
I think
and marketing people.
another sort of thing with that is, if they're not understanding or respecting the way that you work. So one of the things is you're starting to work with people, little things like maybe if you really want to have an agenda before you schedule any sort of meeting, right? All of the ongoing Zooms and these endless meetings that we're having, that the meeting that could have been an email. And so if they're not sort of respecting consistently that how you work. And so one of the good things that one of my mentors had said is you need to make sure that you have the right people on the bus, but also that they're in the right seat. And so it may be that somebody is very, very talented and very good at what they're doing, but if your personality types don't mesh, or if you get that in my experience, if you get that sort of like ick or like that dreaded feeling when you're like heading to a meeting, or like an annoyance that you're getting a meeting scheduled, it's definitely heading into troubled waters.
So Lauren, you brought up something that a big mistake that I made, which is taking a technical person and forcing them into a management role. Unmitigated disaster. So there are people who are very good at management, and there are some people that are very good at technical, and don't confuse the two.
Yeah, I think Lauren had really good points there. And also people just need to be able to, when you bring people into a startup, hopefully the person you're bringing in is going to have strengths that you're weak at, and vice versa. And that person's got to be able to respect the strengths of other folks, but also respect their weaknesses. And if you're really, really good at something, don't expect everybody else to be good at that, because that's why you were brought in the startup. You were brought in because of that talent, but don't alienate or insult other people just because they can't do what you can do. And that all that does is just really, really wreck the teamwork.
We actually have a thing here in our company, which is never assume somebody else's job is easy.
I would like to crochet that and put it on the wall of every company out there. I think that's a really good point. Is it something that just, popped into my brain while everyone was discussing this? And this might be a flat no, but I figured if I had any doubt, I should ask the question. Is it possible, or a good idea, or just possible at all, to work with somebody who you maybe don't like but respect, right? Like somebody who you as a person would probably never socialize with, somebody who you wouldn't want to spend time with on your own. However, you respect their skills in whatever area you're looking for, or whatever is needed. Does that happen a lot? Is that something that you should, it seems like that might go against the gut feeling, having somebody who you don't like, as a person so much, but respect. Is that common? Is that a good idea? Or is that just a recipe for disaster?
I would, well, we have a rule here at Risk Allies, don't hire any a-holes. We have, I would distinguish what you said there, Niall, between, somebody that you want to grab a beer with. I can think of a lot of really good, culture fit, great people to work with, just don't have a whole lot in common, and, might be a little awkward when we're hanging out after hours. I think that's okay. I think different than that, and a real tendency, I can think of a few engineers that I've hired, and, this guy writes phenomenal code, turns it out quickly. Nobody wants to work on a team with him, and it's really easy to underestimate how important that collaboration is, especially early on. So I would say as a hard rule, don't hire someone that maybe depends how you define the word respect, but don't have somebody on the team that that you don't want to be going into battle with. I would maybe draw a line on the other side of if you don't want to hang out with them on personal time. That might be fine, having that mutual respect and not being buddy, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good differentiation. If it's somebody that you just really think is a real asshole or whatever that you just don't want to work with, that's bad. But it's okay if you don't want to hang out with him or her, and that's probably okay, because you really do need some separation. And part of the reason you bring people in is because they're different from you. And, they may just have different interests, or you may have a family, they may not. There's just different life balance things that will make it that you don't hang out together all the time. And that's okay. As long as when you're working and everybody's in for the company, then that's good.
I definitely agree. But the word I would also throw out there is trust. To me, you have to have trust in that individual. And that's just, that to me is the most important thing. If you don't have that trust, it's the wrong person.
Yeah, I think Dan, your comment there just kind of reminded me. I think an easy, especially when when you're moving fast, when things are tight, I think an easy trap to fall into is ending up with a lot of people that feel like you're looking in a mirror. Whether it's physically, you can end up with a lot of the same culture, the same background on the team. I think that can be a danger and something to be wary of. If it's this. I've done this myself in the past. This is a guy I'd love to grab a beer with. Turns out you end up with a lot of the same sort of personalities. Hard to build diversity in a team, and as a team grows bigger and bigger, the makeup of that team is just going to be harder and harder to introduce more diversity, more variety. So I think that's something important to at least be self-aware of.
Yeah.
Sorry, John, as the team gets bigger, you just have to get away from going out for a beer type of events, because that's really a very narrow window of folks. And you need to, if you do want to interact with other team members, then you need to find something that's maybe a little more widely appealing to different people.
And I think people underestimate diversity, and it's a broad term, but to your point, Matt, just finding someone that you go to beers with, you are now self-selecting a certain set there. And I think you need to be able to, you want to be able to have a little diversity of thought, of ideas, of when you're bringing people in. I always like doing the strength finders test, and with people, I believe in, like, when you're assembling a team, like the mission to Mars strategy, you need to have redundancy, but you don't want people clashing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways you do it, and you get very different people in that. People that are just different, but it doesn't make it bad. And I think it makes everybody better if again, if you can trust and respect them, and that way, to me, everybody wins.
There's some interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's some interesting discussion in the chat too. Just talking about the idea of the sort of the boys club, and I mean, as we can see here, I'm on the panel, and it's awesome to see that there are women in the audience and coming to more of these technical things. And for a long time, especially if we're talking about like a decade ago, it was really challenging to be a woman in tech, and frankly, like having to speak up and be more aggressive, and maybe be seen about a sort of a bit of a bitch because I needed to get my point across. And so I think too, like it's not just grabbing a beer as a thing of like spending time outside of work. It's also that you need to consider who you bring onto your team, and that like Dan mentioned earlier, maybe somebody has a family and you don't, or it's not necessarily that I don't want to come out and grab a beer, but I have a 2-year-old, and so I have to be home at a certain time. So I think it's really important, and it's really intentional, like Dan and John have been saying, to actively try to expand your perception or something of who you would like working with or respect working with outside of people you want to hang out with.
Yeah, and I was following that chat too, and the one that stuck out to me was when Laura brought up the bro culture question, and in more ways than one, it is kind of building an insular community, and you lose diversity of viewpoints, ideas, lifestyles, everything, if you're too self-selecting. So, fantastic.
Yeah, so we run a manufacturing company, right? And I'm going to argue that diversity is critical to our success and survival, even because the kind of personality it takes to design a website or design the look and feel of an app is different than the kind of personality it takes to code the app. And it's very different than the kind of personality it takes to field a customer call or sales, or the kind of personality it takes to run a manufacturing floor. So, those are very different things. And so you should find the person that best meets the job, basically.
But patient, you can do all those.
No, I can't. We have a team of 15, 16 people. Maybe in a pinch, I can get stuff done, right? I can code if I had to, but my coding sucks. But that's why we have all these other people on the team that can do that job so much better.
So yes, diversity is moving from a thing to keep in mind to a necessity now that we're realizing the error of our ways. Hopefully, we'll see. All right, so moving on to the next topic, researching the idea. We'll jump right in. What is due diligence and how much depth should be there? What parts of what does due diligence look with respect to the business model, and what does due diligence look like with respect to the technical model?
Technical model doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, the technology is a means to an end. The really important thing is I guess you can say the due diligence for the market and for the customer. You have to solve a customer need, and there has to be enough customers out there. Without those two, technology doesn't matter.
I agree on the business. I don't 100% agree on the technology, because it depends on the market you're going into, understanding what is acceptable in there, what's used by, we have less of the enterprise customers now today because things are more web, and so there's not as much of things there, but understanding how that technology should look, and understanding what the customer expectations, what it's going to run. I think there is some level of due diligence there. I agree, the business is far more important, but I don't think you spend zero time on thinking about the technology.
Yeah, fair point.
I think too, when you're getting your first client, depending on who it is, they will have some guidelines and some requirements in the contracts that they are insisting that you meet, and so that can help guide it too. So while maybe you aren't necessarily sure about the encryption level or different things that you need to do, some of the earlier we did some early sites for digital security, like marketing campaigns for Intel, and part of the work with that was great because it was a code review where their team went in and made sure that it was up to snuff and made recommendations on some of the security things, and those are tools and things that I integrate to this day. So I think that partially the first clients that you get in the first projects and those deadlines will help reflect that and help guide that.
Yeah, and I think some of what I was getting at that was exactly what you said. There are going to be, in some, depending on the idea, of course, some security concerns. If you're going medical, then obviously you might have to think about HIPAA in some situations. If you're dealing with customer information, you've got to deal about protections for that. And then a little bit more what I was hoping somebody would speak on is feasibility, and making sure that what your idea is even possible with current levels of technology, or if it's something that's so on the bleeding edge, how do you how do you define the path to actually realize it if it's something that truly doesn't exist already?
Yeah, I think from my background being in semiconductors, that's a big deal, and it's a real interaction of, this is what I want a chip to do, this is what it has to do. And these are the processing, usually the fab processes that are available. And you might be able to find a fab process that can do it, but it's going to be too expensive. The die is going to be too big, or your yield is going to be very inconsistent, or just not going to make money at it. So I think from that perspective, you definitely have to have the due diligence. And maybe that's a unique situation, but I'm sure there is, I'm not as familiar with some of the other businesses, but I'm sure there's times where you're constrained by technology, where you just can't do what you need to be able to do on an economical basis to make it a viable business.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I probably spoke too harshly on that. You got to be able to prove that the technology does indeed work, right? I mean, let's say, I'm like, I build a fusion reactor in a box this size, right? Of course not. You got to get to that point.
Yeah, and maybe from a different perspective, being SaaS and very, in an industry with very low kind of barriers to entry. I guess my take on that, I think you've got to be a little bit crazy to try a startup. I think if it was too, if the due diligence said this is absolutely home run, nothing could go wrong, the business model is flawless, someone's probably already done that. I think there's a little bit of just inherent risk taking, and you got to believe in this thing working, and we're going to figure out what to do when something goes wrong. So not at all. Don't take that as don't do your homework or don't research the opportunity. But I'd say also don't be kind of paralyzed by if we have any doubts. That's that's a reason to not to think maybe it's a flawed model or won't be successful. Asterisk if you're dealing with healthcare data, if you're dealing with people's lives, that's not the world that at least directly that I'm in. So that obviously calls for more due diligence.
But
just really quick, I so agree with that, and it again ties back to Pei-Chan's note earlier about doing something when you're afraid. And so I do SaaS too, and so most of the stuff is web, and so there's nothing anywhere near as technical, as you guys, as some of the panelists are doing with hardware. But it's part of the fun too, I think, is saying like, how far can we push this? Like, can we make this traditionally, heavy computing processor thing like work in a website? And it's one of the things that I think is so fun about where software is going right now, and how, to Matt's point, how accessible it is. And so to be a little bit crazy to go into it, but also, not be afraid to try to push the boundaries, and have faith in yourself and your team that you'll be able to figure it out, or at least figure out a workaround.
Yep, totally agree. I a lot of times use analogies. Most entrepreneurs, whether it be technical or non-technical, believe you can build a perpetual motion machine, and they're going to strive to get to that. And you don't want to talk them out of that, because something great will come out of that. But as someone who maybe been around the block, you're sitting in there and you're saying, no way that can be done. And so as the entrepreneur, you got to be cognizant of due diligence to someone saying, no, you can't do that because I know you can't build a perpetual motion machine. Well, you can certainly go down that path and find something. So you got to be careful of the feedback and stuff you get there, because experienced people tend to look at things through their vantage points, and they know you can't build a perpetual motion machine. But we wouldn't have any companies out there if they weren't started with the concept that they could build one.
I think I don't think you can really build a viable small company with using bleeding edge technology where you have no idea if you're going to be able to have consistent yield or even be able to manufacture it. So I think it's, the bleeding edge is really for the larger companies that are funded organically, got a good product line, and they're looking out 3, 5, 7 years. I hope my dog barking in the background is not covering this up.
And just to answer your chat, Laura, this should answer that question.
Perfect. I'm going to speed it up a little so that we have some time for Q&A from the audience. So jumping into the last section, finding a technical co-founder. And I know, title of the talk, and we're saving it for last. Bait and switch. And you maybe don't have the answer to this. I don't think once again, there is a right answer for this, but it would be wonderful to get some ideas. Where should you go to look for a technical co-founder, both during and hopefully post-pandemic? I've heard thoughts running around, are students a viable option? networking events, how worthwhile are they? Are co-working spaces a good place to build community, or are they really not? Any technical meetups you'd recommend, and along those lines, how to not stick out as a sore thumb if you're a business-minded person in a technical crowd. Yeah, thoughts on where to find, and I'm resisting the urge to say where to go hunting.
Well, in one of the in one of the startups I attempted that crashed and burned. I found my co-founder at Hacker Lab. He actually is still on as part of our team now at TCheck. Not a co-founder, but he's still part of the team at TCheck. I say in general, man, this is like practically a marriage, right? You know, your co-founder. So if it's like one degree of separation, somebody that you know that gets referred, I think is really important, because you know that trust thing that we talk about a lot here, that's absolutely critical. You have to be able to trust this person, and you know, if you just meet this person in a speed dating kind of thing, you really trust them yet? Might take a while.
Yeah, I was gonna echo something like that too, where the company that I'm serving as a CTO now, they were approached, to Chang's point, they were approached or introduced to us by another advisor who was like, hey, this company is doing something with mapping that is along the lines of kind of what you're interested in. And so we met, and the CEO of that company really sold me on how cool the idea was, and how, as I was saying at the beginning of the talk, how something I had already developed could be applied into another market for something that he was doing. And so I would say part of it is, you know, for 1 degree of separation, like Chen said, there's so many good, I know Laura, who's in here, the Carlson Center, Startup Fac, there's a lot of good programming so that you can hopefully expand your network in the area, so that you can, you know, better know, not necessarily speed dating, but get to know more people so that people know what you're working on and what you're interested in. But then also make sure that you do your research. If you're hunting for somebody, do your research on their product and what they are working on, because it might even help you, you know, get ahead faster and get an MVP a little bit faster if they've already got something working that might be interesting.
So I think from an investor point of view, probably the more successful companies that I've seen are those with co-founders that maybe knew each other in college, or they worked together before, and even not immediate past jobs, but jobs in the past. And so they do have that trust already developed and that relationship already developed. So they're just that they're already on second base, going to third base onto the home run, and not starting out at the batter's box. I don't know much about baseball, but I think that's the right analogy. But they already have that relationship built in the trust. And you know, if you're lucky enough to know somebody like that, then that might be a place to start, or somebody that you really trust to be able to recommend somebody there. So that just gets that relationship on a good start.
Actually,
One thing
go ahead.
One thing I want to point out is, you know, as you're hunting around maybe your Rolodex for a co-founder, or you know, looking across at your friends, I want to stress, see how they behave when the shit hits the fan, when things are going really, really, really bad. Because invariably in the startup life, something's going to go really bad, and how they handle that situation is way more important than how they handle situations when things are going well.
Yeah, so the story at the startup I was at, it was a little earlier than when I started. They took the potential CEO candidate out on a boat on Sacramento River, and they just like floored the engine and put him in charge of steering the boat and just see what he was going to do. And obviously he passed and he did really well, but they just put him in a really, you know, awkward situation and just saw how he reacted.
You know, I'm a fan of the extreme methods. quickest way to find out. Definitely. So it sounds like, nobody really spoke up for the concept of speed dating, as I had heard it said, of trying to find somebody really fast, and that it really does take some getting to know somebody to really find a good co-founder. And I just wanted to give anybody a last chance to point to a situation where it might be okay. I know I've had folks in the area go and look at some local, student groups for trying to find somebody who might be on board with doing that. But what I'm getting from here is really that, that personal connection is really important. And John,
I think it's fine to, yes, people need ways to meet people, and so speed dating type of concepts are a way to meet that. But I think that, at least my opinion is, don't fall in love and get married right after the speed date. There are ways, it doesn't matter if it's co-founder or partnership with a business or a spouse in life, you're going to crawl, walk, run. And so you have to have that same approach. And, you can start, that speed dating could be the introduction of that relationship, find common ground. Maybe there's friends you can reference check, but also talk about the idea, bounce ideas off the person. And, that person may have, very different ideas or relevant ideas, little homework projects or something like that. So I think there's a way to get that crawl, walk, run and still be successful there. I know companies who have done that and have been successful, what I call, I think there's a little luck there too. But the thing that I've learned from people who have done that is they didn't meet somebody out at a speed dating event and decide to get married the next day. So.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think. Oh, go ahead, Lauren.
No.
Matt was first, Lauren second. Decided.
All right. Just something I think there is value in the speed dating events. We've found some good developers through those. I would say it's a bit more of cast a wide net, and I think one of the big values is just building that network. You don't know when those connections are going to come in handy. I think if you feel like love at first sight, and I found my co-founder, and tomorrow let's start a company, probably be a little bit nervous about that. Something else I would maybe recommend, if I don't envy folks who are trying to do this during a COVID world. That's a whole new dimension to deal with. I think something to consider. Find people who are doing something, maybe a few degrees removed, something similar. Maybe they have they're not, clearly not in a position to go jump into a new startup. Talk to them anyway. Very rare that they're going to say, I don't have time to even shake hands and chat a little bit. And you might say, here's some of what I'm looking for. And I say, oh man, I know somebody just moved across the country and they're looking for an opportunity like that. Just building that network, and especially when it's personal. If you get a random LinkedIn message that's clearly copy paste, you're probably going to ignore it. But if it's, hey, I'm interested in that thing you're doing, would love to pick your brain or bounce some ideas off. I think co-founders tend to jump at the chance to have those conversations. So don't be shy.
Yeah, I was gonna say part of when I had a success story in terms of sort of like speed dating that turned into something positive. I was volunteering. I saw an Instagram ad last winter for, basically this group was creating a design week in Sacramento, and there hadn't been one in Sacramento. And so when I was in San Francisco, I was on that board and organized it for a few years. So I volunteered and hit it off really well with Amanda. And so now, we're about to do another design week in the middle of October. And it turned into a really great thing where, it's something, to Matt's point, that it's something that you're both interested in. You have, common ground, and it's also getting to do small projects or organizing things before saying like, oh, okay, this, to see how you work together. Niall, you had mentioned earlier, how can you, go to an event and not stick out as a sore thumb for a technical event? When I was in San Francisco, I was basically going to a lot of volunteer events where I was the only programmer in a group of designers because I was working for a design firm at the time. And some of those relationships, I got work for literally the entire 8 years that I was in San Francisco just from volunteering. And so for any of the students here, I always recommend volunteering for groups that you're interested in, as well as groups, to Matt's point, that are sort of tangentially related to what you're interested in, because if you're the only developer in a sea of designers, you're going to be the one that they call when they need help.
I think that's a great way to approach it. It's focus on getting to know people before just diving in at first with the let's start a company right now. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, I'll just for Hacker Lab, I've met some interesting people at Hacker Lab taking a welding class. So
yep.
I was just looking to do something actually with my son taking out, and I formed a really good tie. You know, nothing to do with technology. We're doing a welding class, and found just great contact, great network in there. So sometimes it's just getting out, which again, very hard to do right now, but.
Cool. I'm going to cut this off for right there for the main part of the talk, so we have a little bit of time for doing questions. I have a short list of questions here, and some of them may involve backtracking over. So the first one from Carolyn, to Lauren's point, do you have any resources where we can go to do our homework on what technology we want to use?
I think that, and it sort of depends, like Dan and Peichen will be able to specify more for manufacturing. I think, for SaaS, it's like Matt said earlier, it's so accessible now. You can take a bunch of, small, even free courses to get a handle on the types of web technologies that you can do. I think it does require, like I said at the beginning, I think that you do need to have enough knowledge to be dangerous and to not be sandbagged. Like John said earlier, you want to be able to have some sort of an idea. You might not be the most technical person, but if you're asking somebody to, change a font on a website and they say it's going to be a half a day of work, there's something wrong with your technical co-founder. So you need to know enough to be dangerous.
Fantastic. Next question from Dolores. What if, and it sounds like a kind of follow-up to the last one, what if you know absolutely nothing about technology, right? Like where do you even start? Where do you even get your feet wet?
There are so many online courses and classes for intro to technology. I mean, from YouTube to, the more code academies and stuff like that. I mean, there is an abundance of there's almost too much resources out there today, I would say. But I think there is a whole target class of kind of that, what I would call 100 level, introduction level to different technical things that are available for free on the web. And I would look at the free ones before I would go off into some of the paid ones.
I think so.
Go ahead, Dan.
In early stage, you don't necessarily need an advisory board, but if you've got a friend that understands things and really doesn't want to get involved in a startup and doesn't want to put in the hours and hours and hours, maybe they've already done it, but they can at least give you some advice on what direction to go and what classes or whatever or even vet some direction or people.
Yeah, there are no stupid questions. I mean, I think the only wrong thing to do is not ask questions to people. So
a shameless plug here for Hacker Lab. If you want to go to someplace that's a community and learn new things, Hacker Lab. Anyway, it's done with that. Next question. And I don't think we didn't really touch on this too much, and I had thought about including it, but didn't. From Jasmine, what about financial agreements when starting off, equity and salary? Like, how do you have those? What are the questions to ask, I guess?
In a startup, nobody gets a startup salary, so that's an easy answer. Equity. So,
easy tempting thing is always to say, I'm going to split it, take 100% divided by n number of people. And yeah, Dan's like, hell no. Bad idea. So I would say, always have some kind of earn-in sort of thing, right? Where, you are allocated a block of shares or something like that, but it takes you a while to earn that, right? I think that's absolutely critical because, sometimes stuff doesn't work out and you have to either replace that person or move on or whatever. And you don't want to be burdened with this person that holds a whole bunch of shares of your company that is not working in the company. So, that's something important to do. Yeah.
Yeah, again, the Foundry Group, there's a number of organizations. I think Brad Feld has published stuff on his blog. Buffer has this thing for transparency. There's a lot of best practices, again, out there for what people have done with equity division and all that other stuff. So there is some research you can do with just Google and search to look for some of this stuff. So, I would look at that. I think sometimes I've seen a lot of struggle. Typically, people want to give up too little, not too much. But I don't think it's the world's not equitable either. So I don't think it's necessarily you're going to come in and just split it either way. So there is a division thing. I think you have to be cognizant of are you going to take funding? What kind of valuation? What kind of people are going to fund you and stuff like that? Because people will be diluted, and then the most important thing is vest everybody. Nobody should have stock outright unless they pay money for that stock. Because, there's so many bad stories of splits and people have had to, just blow up the company because somebody had, 50% of the company that now, worked a month and then is gone and stuff like that. So you want to protect against that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the other thing is don't be afraid to approach some local attorneys that work in security or small business or startups. Likely they're willing to, just sit coffee over a Zoom call or whatever and just give you some ideas. You may have to pay later for an agreement, but some of them will defer also if you got the right idea. And so I wouldn't hesitate to actually ask for some professional advice. And probably from an investor point of view, if you set up your company from the very beginning the right way and divvy it out, then it's going to be much more appealing later on when you do need to bring in investors.
Fantastic. Next question from Laura. Most of the time when a very early stage founder tells me that they need a technical co-founder, what they actually mean is that they can't pay anyone to develop their software, app, website, etc. What advice do panelists have for or against this strategy? Everyone's smiling. Everyone. That tells me you all have experience with this and you're holding back because you want to say something, I don't know.
Udemy is your friend. I mean, learn to code a little bit.
I think I actually get some of that sentiment at Hacker Lab a lot, being that we're a place that advertises with the keywords of CNC and laser cutting and 3D printing and all of these cool things. And we'll get somebody who asks us, hey, I need this thing printed for me. And I'll say, oh, fantastic. Here's a set of classes that you can take to learn how to do that yourself. And they say, no, can I just pay somebody to do it? And then I go, well, we don't do it themselves. And then I get to pass it around to everyone who I know who does those things. I guess, is that a valid strategy or does that come off as scummy?
If you want to offer equity to a person to help you build the first perfect concept and all that kind of thing, you better be willing to live with this person for a very long time.
All right. Thanks. Next question from Adorable, and sorry for getting your name wrong on the previous one. At the early stages of working with a tech founder, what are the standard legal agreements made? Do you sign an NDA with each other? And I'll add, or do you just rely on trust?
So typically, my experience is agreements are with the company, not individually. So if you're just co-founding, usually there's not a lot of ND there. I mean, it all depends on what you're doing. If you truly have something novel and secret, then maybe there's something there. But most ideas really are not that interesting to secure that way. So rarely have I signed an NDA to have conversations, because most of the interesting stuff you're not going to talk at the service, and then there gets to a certain point that maybe it makes sense, but that usually means that you're doing something for the company or for together, so not just in the dating phase.
Yeah, I would say you kind of have two things that play there. How your equity is structured, and make sure that that is set up well. That's a pretty solved problem. Don't try and write your own structures for that. The same for employee agreements. Your co-founder has, you need all the same commitments out of that person as everybody else. Have a good employment agreement. That should include a lot of confidential information, proprietary, those kind of things. That's worth getting right early on. If it's a co-founder that you grew up with and you have the utmost trust, then it might be a good idea instead of an absolute must. But really, no reason not to do that. That stuff is standard and common enough. It's easy to get right.
And do it right early on, especially if you want to bring in other money and investors. Otherwise, it can be a real mess.
All right, and I have 3 questions left, and I'd like to get through all 3 of them. And we're trying for before 8, but that's 4 minutes, so we might go like a couple minutes over. But I'm going to get into hurry everyone along mode. Next question from Carolyn. With respect to advisors, where can you find these advisors? Where do they hang out? And I'll add on, should you wear camouflage when you're looking for them?
Depends on what you're building.
Yeah, that's true. One thing that you could look at is accelerators, or so I previously have met John now because I'm doing the 4th Wave Accelerator, which Carlson Center is also involved in, and so that has been invaluable because of all of the advice. And so, as I was mentioning about sort of needing to get to that next level with either bringing a CTO in, or there's some technical things that I'm just not sure about and I need advice on. 4th Wave has been invaluable for that. So look for accelerators. That's where John hangs out anyway for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it depends what you're doing. I mean, I've brought in advisors, when I've gone into a new technical space that I'm not an expert in. And so I've sought out advisors, and sometimes I just look who are the domain experts, and find a way to, somebody that knows them that can introduce me, or I've gone in cold. And certainly with technologists, I found actually that most technology people, or at least they're very approachable, especially if you're looking at them as, someone as an expert. They generally like to share that kind of knowledge and that recognition. So I've used LinkedIn a lot to find advisors for my business that are relevant in the domain I needed them in.
Perfect. Next question from Laura. One of the issues women in tech have is that they don't go out for beers with the guys bros, but does that mean that they don't belong on the team?
No.
Absolutely not. I have 3 kids at home. I don't go out for beers with the guys either.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think we touched on it earlier. Yeah, I think it's definitely exciting that everyone's being more inclusive and being intentional about making sure that there's different voices on the team, and it's proven to be successful too and make businesses more successful. So absolutely.
Yeah, and I think team building exercises are important, but going out for beers is not a team building exercise. So I think you've got to look at look at something that's appropriate to do in there. But it doesn't mean you can't go out with beers with people, but that's not what I would call a team building exercise.
All right, and final question from Chad. What are your thoughts on remote co-founding teams? I think that is very apt right now, so great question to close with. do you think it's possible even if you haven't done it?
What was that?
What are your thoughts on remote co-founding teams? So we're 100% remote even in the early stages.
I think it's possible. I wouldn't envy the extra challenge. I think it's something that'll take more work. It's really easy to type Slack messages all day, and takes a little bit of extra discipline to say, let's jump on a video call and see face to face and develop the relationship. I think that's a really important thing, that if you're not vigilant about it, if you're sitting next to somebody in an office, you don't have to go out of your way. It doesn't take any special effort to have that connection and kind of culture and rapport. I think that's stuff you got to be thoughtful about, and set goals, set culture and kind of intention for the team, and do that. But I certainly think it's possible.
Yeah, I agree it's possible, but everybody has to buy into it. You can't have one person that believes in remote and the other person that doesn't, because it does take effort by both. It's different. I don't want to necessarily say it's harder, it's different. I mean, I have a remote team right now. I did a remote startup where I was on the West Coast and my co-founder was in Boston. We actually would spark up video for hours on end and just leave it open, leave the line open and be like we're working at a desk next to each other, so we could always, bring it up. So there are ways to do it. I do think I do think you lose something. I mean, there's, especially technical, there's something about going to a whiteboard and working through an issue that I just love. And technology is getting better, and there's whiteboards in there, but if you've seen my handwriting, you would understand that my whiteboarding stinks. So, I think it's harder, but not impossible. But everybody has to buy into it. If you have one person that doesn't believe in it, it's doomed.
Fantastic.
I would say it's possible if you've already had a previous relationship with a person, and the trust is already there.
Much easier.
Yeah, to find somebody that you've not met before and build the company from there.
Yeah, my Boston one was that was our third startup we were working on, so we already had a lot of we knew each other very well.
Fantastic. Well, we've hit 8 p.m. and I don't want to keep everybody too long. I'm sure we could wax poetic on these topics for hours and hours and hours and hours, but we've got to cut it somewhere. So I want to thank all of our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules, both work and home life, and it's getting harder and harder to delineate between those two these days. So thank you so much. We will be releasing this recording in one way or another, so keep an eye out. I know I want to try to get it out on our YouTube channel, and then I think also just sending out the Zoom recording to some of the anybody who attended this. And yeah, thank you all for joining. We get no awkward applause to close out the session, so it'll just close abruptly. Thank
you, Niall, and thank you for all the
Niall.
participants for all the questions.
Yeah, great questions. And good luck on finding your co-founder.
Oh yes, yeah. Thanks, Carlson Center, so much, and Cameron in particular. He's been fantastic to work with, and thanks to everyone else.
Thank you all.
Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you, panelists.
Oh, you can digitally clap. Oh, how do I do that?
The good old
reactions.
Oh, I don't like reactions. All right. Yay. Okay. All right, thank you. Now let's awkwardly end it. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.